Hi, I'm Dave Watts. Welcome to the third part of GSA 100, Searching for Experts. In this session, we'll learn about expert search, where we index user information from LDAP, SharePoint, or other repositories, and provide a custom search interface to allow searchers to identify people with specific attributes. Within many organizations, user data is stored within repositories other than regular web servers, such as LDAP or SharePoint profiles. We can extract and index that data and include whatever attributes are contained within that repository, such as names, titles, and email addresses. Once indexed, we can customize the search interface to show that data separately from regular search results and emphasize the important fields within that data. When using expert search, you'll have a separate collection for user data, and this will be used to populate the sidebar element. Regular search results that exclude user data will be shown on the left side of the screen. The sidebar element can be customized to show the fields you want. To configure expert search, we'll first need to index the data. In the case of LDAP or SharePoint profiles, we can use the corresponding connectors for LDAP or SharePoint. You can use any data the GSA can index, as long as you're able to capture the fields you want and specify a corresponding collection for the results. However, LDAP and SharePoint profiles are the two most common repositories for user data. If you're using one of those, you can configure it directly from the Expert Search screen by using the Data Sources tab. Next, you'll need to create a collection for your user data, and you'll also want to exclude that user data from the other collections you want to search. Because you shouldn't modify or delete the default collection, you should not use it for searches if you're also using Expert Search. Instead, you can create a collection that contains everything except user data and use that. Finally, you can configure one or more front ends to display expert search results. If you've already enabled search sidebar functionality, like dynamic navigation or dynamic result clusters, you won't be able to configure that front end through the expert search screen. However, you can manually edit the XSLT to include more than one sidebar item. To use LDAP data, you'll start by configuring the LDAP connector. You may need to work with your LDAP administrator to get a user account that has read access to everything in LDAP and to identify the connection method, search base, search filter, and fields to be indexed. All of those fields, or LDAP attributes, will be indexed as metadata. Then you're ready to create a collection that includes only the LDAP data and modify or create other collections that exclude the LDAP data. To create the LDAP collection, you can do this by creating a collection like you normally would under the Collections page, or you can do it right from Expert Search by choosing Add a New Collection from the Select a Collection drop-down when you're configuring a user interface. To exclude LDAP data from other collections, go to each of them as needed within the Collections page and add the URL patterns to exclude. The default collection should not be modified, as it's very useful for reporting on all the data in the index, but you can just create a new collection that includes everything but LDAP data if you're currently using the default collection for searches. Once your LDAP indexing and collections are configured, you can customize one or more front ends to display your experts. Here, you can specify the collection to use or create a new one as described previously. You can specify which metadata field should be used for searches. Finally, you can specify the layout of the data. The layout is presented using two views. The first view is the widget view, which will appear in the sidebar next to regular search results when a user performs the initial search. The user can then click through to a detailed view, which shows the expert search results instead of regular search results. The detailed view can also include its own dynamic navigation, so that search users can drill down to find other people within the same categories as the original people found with expert search belong to. The detailed view can actually point to a different style sheet altogether as well. Let's take a look at expert search using the LDAP connector. First, I'll verify the connector results will be allowed in the index. To do this, I'll visit crawl URLs and look for a pattern to allow content feeds from connectors. So I'll go to Content Sources, start and block URLs, which used to be called crawl URLs on GSA 7. And I'm looking for this particular pattern. So this might already be in there by default, as it is for me. Basically, anything that feeds data using a connector will either use that pattern or one other pattern. This is the pattern that the LDAP connector will use. So that's already in there. Next, let me take a look at some of the actual data that I want to use. That data is in two places here. We have data in LDAP. So to look at that data, we're going to need to use an LDAP browser. For this, I'm using a program called JExplorer. JExplorer is a free and open source LDAP browser. So I will need to connect to my LDAP server, and I'll need to specify the container where all of my users are so that I don't have to do too much browsing. We call that the base distinguished name. I'll go ahead and log on, connect. And by default, Active Directory will only retrieve 1,000 entries at a time. So I might get an error message when I connect if I retrieve more than that. But this is enough. What I want to do is take a look at users. And basically every user that we have is in here. I'll go ahead and pick one of them at random. We have Jim Rambo. And in the table editor, I can see all of the attributes of this person. First of all, I can see it is a person. Common name equals person. Object class equals person. Farther down, I can see the male attribute. I can see the display name. I can see a male nickname. I can see first names and last names. So SN is the surname. Given name is the first name. So all the data that I want is there. In addition, there is a picture, but the picture is not literally stored in LDAP. So to get to that picture, we actually have the picture stored on a web server. Now if I take a look on Athens in the portraits directory, you'll notice that we have different JPEG files here, so picture 1, picture 2, picture 3, and basically we can associate those with the individual users in LDAP. Okay, so now I'm ready to actually get my data into the GSA. I've made sure that my connector pattern is there. To actually set up the connector itself, I can go to connectors, or I can go down and find user data under expert search. Both of those are going to give me the same option for configuring data sources. So it really doesn't matter which one you want to use here. Both of them take you to the same place. Now the connector that we want to use is on Connector Manager 0. And of course we want to use an LDAP connector. So we can give it really whatever name we want to use here. Then we'll specify the information about our LDAP server, just like we did when we set up LDAP for authentication using the administration option. Password that we want to use. We'll specify our LDAP search base. And our user search filter. And ideally you'll be somewhat familiar with LDAP for this, but basically your user search filter is going to be an LDAP expression. And if I take a look at this, you'll notice it's wrapped in parentheses. This is actually two sub-expressions. We're looking for any element where object class equals person and object class equals user. And the AND operator is actually placed before both of those, and then everything is wrapped in parentheses. So once I'm satisfied with that and I click on Save, it's going to give me a list of the different attributes that I want to choose. So of course the attributes I want to choose are going to be the ones that I want to search against and display. I'll go ahead and choose department, description, which in our case actually contains that photo picture file name that we were talking about earlier, display name, given name, mail, telephone number, and finally title. If you had additional fields in here that were custom to your schema, they would show up here as well. So whatever fields we happen to have. Now, once I'm all done with this, I can go ahead and save this. And I should be able to see my connector entered. I should see a green light here right away. And shortly after doing that, I should be able to go to feeds and make sure that my connector is running. So I can see my LDAP connector is running. Actually, it's completed. It indexed 195 entries. So I do have data in my index, so that's a good thing. Now, under index, we have collections. And just to save a little time, I've already created 2 collections. So I have my default collection already, and I don't want to delete or modify that. So I have a single slash there. I don't want to exclude anything because the GSA really needs to have a way to let you see everything at once, and that's what the default collection lets you do. So I've created 2 collections. One is expert collection, and this includes the pattern that corresponds with our connector. So it's Google connector, followed by whatever you specified as the connector name, and then localhost. So that's in there. I'm not excluding anything there. But I also have a collection that I created which I'm calling everything except expert collection. So if I go ahead and click on edit for that, I'm including everything like the default collection, but I'm excluding the results from my connector. Okay, so at this point, I need to go to search, and I need to have a front end that will display this data. So I've created a new front end called expert front end, but so far it's really just a default. So I'll go ahead and click on edit there, and go to search results, and I'll choose people search results, and then save. Now, at this point, I'm ready to do a search. So I'll open up a new tab, and I'll go to GSA1. So I'll go ahead and do my search. I'll search for the word Jim. I'll go ahead and remove the proxy style sheet parameter. And at the very end of this, I will add get fields equals asterisk to get all of my data. This is going to get all of the metadata, so I can see these are results from my connector, and they contain all these MT tags. Those correspond to metadata. Not all of my documents have the same metadata, or even have any metadata. But the metadata is there where it needs to be. So now, let me change my front end and collection accordingly. So I've got my main collection, which is everything except expert. I'm going to change my client to the expert front end, and I will change my proxy style sheet to the expert front end. Now I'm ready to do my search again. I'll search for Jim. And you'll notice that initially what I'm getting here is just these two results. So while I have turned on, the expert search results, nothing is displaying yet. And that's because I haven't actually yet configured expert search results for that front end. So let me go back to my admin console, and I'll go to expert search. This is under search features. Choose my front end and click on configure. I will select my expert collection, and then I'll add the properties that I want to search against. So the properties that I want to search against here are given name, and telephone number. So those are the tags that, again, will be searchable here. Then I'm ready to control the display. So we actually have two different view types. Widget is the initial view, and then detailed, of course, is what you would get if you drill down. So I'm going to leave it at widget, and then I'm going to select the fields and photo that I want to display. For the first field, it'll be a text field. It will be called name, and then it asks for something called a value template. This will be wrapped in curly braces, and this is the field from LDAP that we want to use. Now, for name, I'm not going to have any additional attributes. I'll click on OK. Then I'll click on the second plus sign. This one will be called title. And then one more, which will be called email. And this will use the mail attribute. For the photo, I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I'm going to specify a height and width. And if I just put in a whole number like this, that's going to be in pixels. And then I'm going to specify a value template. So just like before, we're going to have curly braces, but because I'm actually building a URL out of this, what I'm going to end up with is a little more complicated. So this is where my portraits are, and then I'm going to inject the value from LDAP to figure out which specific file to serve. I'm going to use that also for the landing URL so that if the user clicks on that, this is where they'll go. They'll actually see that picture. Okay, at this point, I've customized my front end. I'll go ahead and save my changes. And once they're saved successfully, if I go back under Expert Search, I should see that my front end is now enabled. So now I can go back. I may need to actually wait a little bit for this to take effect. But once it does take effect, I'll see both of these load up. The experts will actually load up asynchronously, slightly after the rest of the page. And it has a little pager. I can click through the pager, and it's using Ajax to display these results. This concludes our third presentation, Searching for Experts. Thank you for watching, and make sure to watch the other GSA 100 presentations.